Welcome to Rose City Politics. It is January the 27th. Our regular panel tonight includes myself, John Lidke. We have Doug Sartori here as well, coming from the TEDx stage. Doug, how are you?
I'm doing just wonderfully. I'm here to talk about paradigm shifts and fundamental change.
Well, it's great to have you. We'll give you your 5 minutes and we're going to have a really good conversation afterwards. We also have Don Merrifield here tonight. Don, how are you?
I can't believe I spent $100 on this shitty TEDx talks, but yeah, I'm happy to be here.
I signed up for the meet and greet, and that was just a waste of money all around.
And there was no meat there at all. I looked.
Too much greet, not nearly. Well, I'm not going to finish that sentence. I'm not going to let someone clip that. Well, it is good to be here with all of you tonight. Please support Rose City Politics by becoming a Patreon subscriber. Head to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. We are broadcasting live on tape. And as always, Rose City Politics is brought to you with the kind support of Leuna 625, Building Better Communities. We have a really fun show tonight. We will be discussing improved traffic flows. It's one of the goals of Ford Mobility and City of Windsor collaboration. We will also be talking about how Mayor Drew Dilkens was appointed the vice chair of the Southwest Ontario Transportation Task Force. And we will also be talking about how our CAO, Honorio Colucci, is on the way out, and we have a new one who has been selected. He has a start date, and we will be talking about that third. So strap in. Welcome to Rose City Politics, and we're going to get right to this. Our first story coming from the Windsor Star's Dave Waddell. Improve traffic flow, one of the goals of Ford Mobility Windsor collaboration. This collaboration between Ford Mobility and the city is a collaboration based on transportation data projects. It's aimed at improving the quality of life and safety of residents. It's also the first established collaboration with a Canadian city by Ford Mobility. The goal, by tracking data from Ford vehicles that are equipped with communication software already activated for connectivity, data will be collected that can help the city improve traffic flow, traffic signal timing, and public transit route planning, as well as identify accident hotspots and monitor traffic speed and vehicle stop patterns. This data will be fed straight to Ford Mobility, and the city will be augmenting it and providing its own crash and other traffic-related statistics. This project will focus on safety and help inform city decisions and plans for infrastructure or policy changes. You know, it's a pretty interesting collaboration, Doug. I know that you sort of did a bit of digging under the hood when this first came out, and we were talking about it in our planning chat. What's your take on what you've heard about it? And I guess the fact that, we're the first city to be involved in it. It's not that surprising, obviously, due to where we are located with the border, with Ford having, its operations on the other side of the border. They're heavily invested in the autonomous vehicle market on the other side of the border. So what's your take on this project, Doug?
It's an interesting use of data by the city. So let's start there with the positive stuff. I think this is an interesting use of big data that has been collected from many users of Ford vehicles and aggregated by Ford. So to the extent that this technology tool is going to be a tool that helps the city in planning and in designing safer infrastructure, it is interesting. Um, I think that my issue with it is the way that it was sold and the way that it has been packaged and the way that that package has been consumed by media. If you are like me and even more than me, Don, if you're a person of a certain age, you will remember that back in the 80s there was a genre of media story. I like to think of it as pet store gets a computer. And essentially, the news stories were in that vein. They were about some small business, some organization getting a computer and doing some of their operations using that new technology. And this is really not that different. This is a story about the purchase of a piece of software. If that's news, you could write that story 20 times a year. I'll just give you one example. When Transit Windsor was planning the new transit infrastructure for the city as part of the new transit master plan, they consulted with data providers. They purchased cell phone data in order to understand how residents were moving around the city. And they used some pretty interesting and advanced online tools for route planning. So not very different from what's happened here. The difference is, I think, that this was really heavily pushed by the Economic Development Corporation and some of their community partners, and as well as by the city. And the reason that it was pushed, in my opinion, the reason that this has been pushed as a story is because Weed Sea needs some good news. The Economic Development Corporation has been taking a little bit of a beating lately politically, and I think that was a pretty straight up effort to provide a little bit of polish. Let's look around what tools are available in the room that we already have that we can take, polish up, and present to the public as evidence that Weed Sea is doing stuff. The problem is that when you dig at the substance of this, I don't see how there is any economic development or diversification component to this initiative. This is approaching a vendor, buying some software. This does not get us any closer to diversifying the economy of Windsor Essex. It does not move us into the auto industry of the future. It is not an instance of whatever that cursed word automobility means. It's none of those things, except that that's how it was packaged and sold to media. And I think that we need to take our local media to task a little bit, because guys, there is more to your job than just hitting print on the press release. This needed some good questions to be asked, and the first good question that needed to be asked is, why is this a story? And I think once you know why it's a story, then you as a media outlet have to decide if you want to be part of the process of polishing the image of the Economic Development Corporation. This is just not a big deal. It's nice that the city is doing it. I guess it's nice that they're using federal money to do it. But why this is a story has everything to do with politics and everything to do with the PR needs of the Economic Development Corporation, and nothing really to do with informing the community about what's happening in terms of diversification and economic development.
Let me ask you a question. You're the expert in this kind of stuff. Wouldn't this kind of information, couldn't you buy this from Google or somebody like that? Lord knows they're tracking traffic patterns and everything else.
There's lots of vendors. I think that there's lots of vendors who sell information like this. I think that the advantage in getting it from Ford is that it's the information is not only cell phone tracking, but it's also based on telemetry in the vehicle. One of the examples that was given in the media report was that Ford knows when harsh braking happens.
Mm-hmm.
So they can not only identify accidents, they can identify near misses. When you start to see harsh braking again and again and again at a certain intersection, it probably means there's something to take a look at. So it's the data that Ford has. Other automakers would presumably have it or will soon be collecting it as well. That data is unique to them because it's data they directly connect. So while you could get movement data from Google, and that's what Transit Windsor did, I'm not sure if they got it from Google, but they got it from someone who had cell phone data. It wouldn't be as rich as the data that you're getting from Ford, and it wouldn't include the analytics that Ford is providing. Not only are they providing the data, but they're providing a platform that gives the consumer of that data the ability to interpret it more easily.
So, yeah, you brought up the Economic Development Corporation, Doug. They contributed $30,000 for this project. Now, that contribution was through a FedDev Ontario grant specifically for automobility ecosystem building. So,
Yeah.
Doug, I'm sorry, you can't say it doesn't exist. A grant was written for it and approved.
I think I said it was a cursed word, not that it doesn't exist. When you hear somebody say automobility, they are hanging a sign on their chest that says, I am a shill. That is not a word that people use in the real world.
Strong words from Doug Sartori.
Are
That's
are you
why
trying to tell us we're getting sold a bill of goods here on this, Doug?
Yeah, a little
Because
bit.
they've been using what the hell was it? Auto mobility as a term for Windsor's going to be this fantastic Google self-driving car world one day, and it doesn't actually mean anything.
I don't want to digress too much from the story at hand, but
Yeah.
the automobility thing, in my opinion, is the city and the Economic Development Corporation lowering the bar. So, if you remember, a decade ago under Mayor Francis, diversification was about going out and doing the work to find new direct investment in our community in new industries, whether that be an airplane maintenance hub, whether that be call centers, whether that be an electric bus factory. All of those things were efforts that were made by the city to bring new investment to the community. What has happened, in my opinion, and I think, I've talked about this again and again. Mayor Dilkens talked about diversification in his inaugural speech in 2018. He made this the centerpiece of his inaugural speech. I didn't do that. He did, and since then he's dropped the ball. To the extent that the mayor is responsible, and the mayor is responsible for setting the agenda for the city, he has dropped the ball. There has been very little movement on economic diversification, and now what we're seeing is a lowering of the bar. Tech didn't work. The airplane hub didn't work. XYZ, none of them worked. So now we're going to talk about vertical diversification within the auto industry and using that as a springboard to get to the kind of diversification this community needs. This is like your kid bringing their report card home and saying all the other kids in the class got C's, so it's okay.
I want to compare the 30,000 that we'd see spent on this to the 270,000 that was spent on the hospital campaign. Not
for,
to like
for the record, it sounds like Doug was spying on me in the 1970s and 80s because that was every one of my report cards.
Automobility is 10% as important as shilling for a new hospital to the Economic Development Corporation, and maybe less than 10% because it's somebody else's money.
True. It's like zero.
I guess they couldn't find a help the local developers grant, so they had to fund it themselves.
Look, I would have been more than happy to go and find that grant for them because any development is good for everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Don.
it is interesting. You look at the piece that the Star put out. I didn't include the quotes directly in it when we do these summaries, but it did have a nice quote directly from the mayor, which I think as well goes to what you're talking about, Doug, with just a level of media scrutiny, and that's sometimes what we do here on the show. And I agree with you. I do think it is important because these are just really nice spoon-fed quotes for a relatively easy story, and it's pretty easy to presume where the story came from.
Yep, for sure. And so while we're on this topic, I do want to point out Mita Williams in her week notes this week wrote about this. She wrote about it from a slightly different angle, and one that I also think is worth exploring from the angle of privacy protection and of outsourcing government activity to the private sector. So, in some senses, this is an outsourcing gig because if you didn't purchase this software from Ford, presumably that work would have had to have been done inside the city with other means. So to some extent, this is not only automation, but it's outsourced automation, which I think is really interesting. And on the privacy thing, well, I think that this is the purchase of aggregate data from an auto company. And therefore, it probably doesn't directly relate to the privacy of residents. I think it's really important that when the city enters into a contract, a data sharing contract with a third party, especially a private sector third party, I think it's really important that there be some guidelines and principles that they use to determine whether that is a good idea. To the best of my knowledge, the city currently does not have that. I think the city should consider it. Any city councilors who are listening, here's a notice of motion that I strongly suggest you make, or a council question that I strongly suggest you ask. I think it would be worth finding out how the city vets this type of purchase of data from third parties, and what are the ethical rules around it. To my knowledge, we don't have any. The city can go and buy, bus usage data from a cell phone company. They can go and buy this aggregate data from Ford. They can apparently launch drones and take people's pictures. And there's really no policy at the municipal level in terms of what privacy in the digital age means to residents. Privacy and privacy policy is not just a way for you to avoid annoying HR questions. It is actually something that matters, and it's something that we should have a community conversation about.
How do you think we go about starting that conversation? I mean, it's a pretty heady topic.
I just suggested, I really do think that it would be a great question for a city councilor to ask about the process and ask what goes into this decision making. We're making assumptions because it's not transparent. Let's make it transparent and get some information into the public record about how administration and ABCs like the Economic Development Corporation, how they determine whether a data sharing agreement is in the best interests of residents and is appropriate for residents. Let's not forget, the mayor also wanted to partner with Amazon Ring. He wanted that to happen for this municipality. And again, I think there are some serious questions about privacy there, but they were not triggered, or there doesn't seem to be any process that was triggered by making a purchase or entering into an agreement with a third party around the use of data, potentially the use of personal data. So I think it would be a great question for a counselor to ask, and that would start the ball rolling.
Well, I could think of a couple counselors that you could pitch it to. I could think of a couple counselors you might not want to.
Fred Francis isn't taking my calls anymore.
Really? I'm surprised at that, Don. You should offer him a deal on some new light standards. I hear he's in the market.
That's right. Actually, a question
How did that
for you.
not make it on the topic list for tonight, by the way?
Yeah, that's next week.
Yeah, okay.
Somebody brought this up on thread, and it might have been John, but so I'm going to steal his point. But when you narrow this down to one vehicle manufacturer, especially in a city like Windsor, that's very specific about, we still have operations here building these vehicles. Isn't the data going to be skewed because most of your Ford, not most, but there's a large segment of Ford products that are obviously going to the Ford factory, whereas only Dodge and Chrysler products will go to the FCA factory? Won't that skew the results a little bit, you think?
It's an interesting point, and I do.
If
think
the workers aren't scabs,
I think you do have to think about that. You do have to think about whether or not your data is going to be skewed. I would suggest that late model Ford vehicles, which would presumably only the last couple of years models would have the data collection capability. I would assume that the motor company is able to generalize that based on what data they do have. But it is a good point. You're not going to find out about where the all the bars and strip clubs that FCA workers go to in their Chrysler vehicles. You're not going to find out about whatever near misses or accidents they're having buying the Ford data.
You got to get there quick on your lunch and get back. That's how it works. So there's some traffic
yeah.
problems. It's I used to have many GM products, but it always had OnStar, and they knew where I was all the time, any given time, even when I didn't push the button. It just seems to me like, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. This is this is more your expertise than mine. It just seems like if you really wanted this information, it's probably already out there.
Well, I don't know that the vendors are selling this data to third parties in a way that a municipality could get access to. And Ford definitely has an interest in building up their ability to sell intellectual property. So you can see why they're motivated. Insurance companies buy this data from vehicle manufacturers, and presumably they buy this data from a wide spectrum of vehicle manufacturers. So maybe in the future we'll see a software vendor purchase this data more broadly and produce a more general solution. That's probably inevitable. But for right now, at least in this particular case, it's sitting with the OEM.
Yeah, I know from watching way too much coverage of the Trump administration outgoing on cable news streams online that Allstate offers a service where it does track whether or not you're doing hard brakes or gentle brakes, and it adjusts your bill accordingly. Also, that sounds like a terrifying thing to opt into with an insurance company. Just like, hey, yeah, take a look exactly at how bad of a driver I am, and let's see my policy not change too much.
Well, there's another company down there that actually charges you per mile. Your insurance rates are based off of a mileage thing. So obviously they're tracking every single inch you drive. So I think this is going to be more common. And I think, as Doug mentioned, there's no real privacy discussion going on about this yet from municipal standpoint, but it's going to become more prevalent in society. And I mean, we've done shows like this already, but
Yep.
Well,
To your point, Don. I think that these type of deals are going to become more prevalent. Big data is everywhere. This is something that has trickled down to the end of the market that I play in. I mean, I feed models all the time that are used for this type of analytics and producing. Data out of the aggregation of a whole bunch of, or producing useful decision support data out of the aggregate of a whole bunch of raw data. That's basically what this is. This is something that is happening in shops all over the place now. So I do think that we're not in a position to be able to get ahead of the curve anymore. But if we want to be able to successfully grapple with this in the best interest of residents as a whole, we need to get on it.
maybe someone could make a made in Windsor solution for software that other people are already doing.
It's just what we need.
Let's get on to our next topic here. Still talking about transportation. Mayor Drew Dilkens was appointed vice chair of the Southwestern Ontario Transportation Task Force by the Minister of Transportation, that is Carolyn Mulrooney. The task force has a mandate to help prioritize the implementation of the draft transportation master plan for Southwest Ontario and to advise the minister on critical transit and transportation needs in the region. The region itself is defined as extending from Essex County in the west and south, Norfolk County in the east, and Bruce and Grey counties in the north. In January of last year, the government released the draft plan connecting the Southwest, and it identified 40 priorities that the SWOTTF, I don't know if they're using that, but I think they should be using it.
The SWATF
Yeah, SWATF, it works.
or SWATF.
SWATF. They're going to be, of course, working with stakeholders, communities, Indigenous groups, and local governments. London's Mayor Ed Holder will act as the task force chair. We were talking pre-show. It's not all that surprising that Windsor and London got the chair and vice chair spots, but clearly, Mayor Dilkens, you got to make louder noise up at Queen's Park. I want to see the chair seat next time for Windsor. It's for all of us. It's not, it's not a dig on anyone.
maybe we could start a Christmas card campaign.
Yeah. Drew needs a chair. Drew can't wait. Something like that. I'm just spitballing, guys. So that's an interesting point. I hadn't heard that spin before, but now talking about report cards, this is like what happened to the other 5% when you bring home a 95. Mr. Dilkens, what happened to the chair? How come you got stuck with the vice?
That's right. Let's not focus on anything positive. Let's just focus on the fact that he's vice chair. That would be, we got to keep in theme with the show here. I
mean, the audience knows what they like, and we got to keep them happy. The draft plan identified several key actions for Southwest Ontario, including undertaking an airport activity and infrastructure survey, supporting the trucking industry, widening Highway 3 to Leamington. Heard that one before. Making Highway 401 safer between London and Tilbury, enhancing inter-community rail service, improving local public transit, and connecting people to public services. All commendable things here. I find it interesting. Of course, the draft plan would identify widening Highway 3 to Leamington. I mean, by God, that's how he got elected. Or at least that's how he sold it down here. it's interesting that we're seeing it pop up now. Do you think that that's actually going to happen? I mean, put aside the other stuff, like a lot of it, that's just a lot of lip service that I see right there that's coming out. But, Highway 3 widening it, that's actually pretty concrete. And it would take a lot of concrete too. Do you think we're going to see any infrastructure money flowing down here for that?
If I can answer that question, I would think so. I've seen them doing soil sample tests and things. So I think preliminary, it's happening. Government goes at very slow speeds for a lot of things. So I think I don't know, if it's going to happen in the next year or so, but I think at some point, hopefully, Highway 3 will be widened, and it's desperately needed. I mean, the number of transport trucks basically heading from Leamington heading to the border is just going to get bigger and bigger. And then if anyone's driven down Highway 3, when it comes to two lanes, it's a death trap. Try it on a motorcycle. Trust me, it's not fun. So yeah, I think it's going to happen. So I mean, if that alone comes out of it, this whole thing, it's not a bad thing. I actually think this whole uh, task force is a good idea. I mean, if you look at the southern area of Ontario, we've talked, even the mayor, even go back to Mayor Francis. I mean, we looked at the highway, or sorry, the airport, and if you can use the airport as kind of a central hub for all of our logistical kind of things that we use, trains, planes, and trucks, obviously the ideal situation would be to put everything out by the airport, although that may have changed now with the hospital going out there. It doesn't really make sense to have the airport out there, which brings freight in. You have the train yard, which is right behind me. That's why I'm pointing back here. And a lot of your trucking routes are kind of headed out towards here online. If you can consolidate all those in one spot, you can certainly, make things a lot more efficient and make things run a lot smoother heading across the border. So, I think this task force is actually a good deal. I think, it's nice that Drew is vice chair. Hopefully we can kind of have a little more control and push things a little more our way here. Because, this kind of stuff is needed. I mean, everything is going by truck, train, and plane these days. We buy our groceries on Amazon and they show up in a truck. So this is going to be a bigger deal going forward, as time goes on.
So, yeah, I mostly agree with Don. Mark your calendars, folks. I think it's hard not to see a task force like this as a positive. And in general, having local representation. So we have not only Mayor Dilkens, but we also have Hilda McDonald on that task force, if I remember correctly. Having local representation on the task force is good. I would suggest that if we don't see Highway 3 widened and at least having some significant stretches done by 2022, that's actually going to be a problem for a government in a seat that they seem to want. So, so my expectation would be that we will see some movement on that. But moving past that, so there has been some chatter online about this, and I think that there are folks who are rightfully pointing out the disconnect between having the only major city in Canada to shut down transit during the pandemic, having that mayor be the vice chair of this task force probably doesn't send a great message about the importance of public transportation to the task force or to the government. I think that's a fair point, and I can understand why people make that point, and I think a number of people have made that point online. But I'm really, really interested in the politics here. So, the mayor of London, my understanding, is a pretty conservative fellow, a supporter of the government, a fan of Doug Ford, as is our mayor. And if you happen to listen to our interview with Monty McNaughton, a minister in the PC government the other day, you may note that he was very, very careful to mention the name of Mayor Dilkens. So there is certainly a two-way positive and friendly relationship between the mayor of our city and the provincial government, and that's fine as far as it goes too. And just like this appointment is fine as far as it goes, but the question that I have is, what is the reason for that relationship, and what is the reason for all of the mutual back patting between Mayor Dilkens and between representatives of the provincial government? This goes back to some things that we've talked about a little bit before: the increasingly partisan nature of the mayor's communications, the increasingly nakedly partisan nature of the mayor's communications. And I'm sure that everyone in this call, and probably many people listening, have heard, some of the speculation that is swirling around about whether or not Mayor Dilkens, is possibly eyeing a partisan spot at some point in the future. And all of that is fine. All of that is fair ball, except that um, your job is not to use your office to go look for your next gig or to help your buddies in Queens Park. Your job is to represent and be the mayor of this city. And I don't think that Drew Dilkens has crossed that line in public at this point, although I do think that it is increasingly obvious where his partisan leanings lie, and a little bit to the detriment, I think, of some of his communication efforts. So I think that's something to watch and to continue to watch. This is, by itself, I don't think that you could say, well, vice chair of this task force, obviously, the mayor is a pure conservative slappy. Like, I don't think that that's a conclusion you can draw from this single piece of evidence. However, I do think that it is another item to note and for political watchers to consider as we go forward.
As the conservative on the panel, we find it racist to be called slappies. So if you can cut that out, I'd appreciate it. Isn't it? I mean, I guess I'll push back a little bit on that. Isn't it kind of any mayor's job of any city to kind of suck up to the province, no matter which parties? And I mean, we've seen, when Mayor Francis was around, the Liberals were running the show. I mean, he was pretty friendly with Liberal Party members in the city. There was a bit of animosity there, but you got to work with who's there. Don't you think that's just the way the game is played?
I think having a good relationship from the government is different from running interference for the government, and I think that's a fair point, Don. And everything in politics is shades of gray, and everything is based on your perspective and where you're sitting, and so I think it's fair to have that conversation. But let me tell you where I think the mayor is coming a little bit close to the line is when you see talking points, specifically talking points that are the government's message being repeated by the mayor. When you see the mayor amplifying specific government messages, that's not having a good relationship with the government. That's not maintaining a positive relationship in order to advance the interests of the city. That is being partisan. That is pursuing a partisan line. And we're not talking about the mayor doing that in his private communications, which I think is more than okay. And lots of elected officials at the municipal level have partisan leanings, and they share them to a greater or lesser extent in public. But what I'm talking about is the mayor, as mayor, using the apparatus and the money that the city of Windsor spends for him to do the communications work in the interest of this city. When he starts to use those tools to advance the government's message and starts to repeat government messages, that's when I think you start to get into a little bit of trouble. Again, I'm not saying try Drew Dilkens for treason because of this stuff. That is not what I'm saying, okay? Somebody clip that audio. What I'm saying is that it's concerning and that it bears watching.
Is it any different than Councillor Bordelon kind of shilling for the Liberals and pushing back on the Doug Ford government, or Kieran McKenzie, who obviously is our friend and obviously an NDP guy who's messaging a lot of times is very similar to what the provincial party would be. I mean, my point, when you look at it, I think a lot of municipal politicians do this. I know the mayor's obviously one step above the councillors, so I can understand he has to be a little more careful on this. But we see it with other. I mean, Reno ran for the Liberal Party in an election, so his when he comments on things happening, during the pandemic and that the Ford government's doing. I mean, his messaging and what he's saying is pretty similar to what you see coming out of the Liberal Party, and same for someone like Councillor McKenzie.
So I think that's a fair point. And again, I think there's a lot of shades of gray on this.
I'm just trying to get on the Christmas card list, Doug.
Yeah, I know you are. There's a lot of shades of gray here, and it is open to interpretation, and it is very dependent on how you as an observer see it. And I think when we talked about council report cards, I actually made that point about Councillor McKenzie, that he can come off a little bit partisan sometimes. So I think that that's a fair point. What I don't see coming from either of our most openly partisan councillors, Bordelon and McKenzie, what I don't see from them is directly repeating the message of the party that they support, directly repeating the words of the party that they support. So that's, again, that is open to interpretation. I think it's fair for everyone to take a look at it and kind of make their own decision. I do see a qualitative difference between the way those councillors conduct themselves and even the way that Drew Dilkens conducted himself in the past. He's always been a conservative guy. Drew Dilkens has shown up at partisan events, I'm told. Other city councillors have showed up at partisan events. I'm a partisan. I happen to think that it is an essential part of engagement in the community, and it's a very, very fine thing for people to do, to engage in partisan politics. And I don't think there's anything wrong with an elected official at any level having a partisan leaning and doing the things that a partisan does when they're not doing their job. And I don't think that an elected official at the municipal level should be bringing partisan politics into the workplace, into their official communication, into the council chambers. That's when I think you start to get into trouble, and that's when I think that you are running the risk of being perceived as crossing a partisan line.
But
Yeah,
what
yeah.
is that?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just gonna say I can agree with that, but from my engagement with Councillor Bordelon, we seem to love each other on Twitter these days, and even Kieran, yeah, I see that they're doing the same thing. They're just coming at it from the opposition talking points as opposed to the ruling party talking points.
Would you be surprised to see uh, any of the names that we just mentioned on a partisan ballot in the future?
No.
Right. So
no, yeah, and don't get me wrong. I agree with you. I do think Drew was looking to run for higher office, and I would assume for the Conservatives. So yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just kind of get the feeling he's not really the only one at City Council doing this.
Just to play, I guess, devil's advocate on this, you say like, the risk there, Doug, is to be perceived in a partisan way. I mean, okay, what if it's not a risk, and what if there's no concern? I mean, you're coming from this from a very inclusive sense of governing, and by no means am I suggesting that that's a bad thing. But if it's working for him, we've talked before about how the mayor is able to basically get elected on the reliance of 2 to 3 wards. What if he has gamed this all out, and you're just talking about this yourself, and the voters aren't going to care, and he's going to get what he wants, and quite frankly, we're going to get a better local public or regional transit system out of it.
Well, again, I am not calling for the trial of Drew Dilkens for treason or inciting insurrection or anything
This
like
week,
that.
this week.
Make sure you get the full quote, people. um, I think the issue came up. I think it's fair. This is a political show. I think it's fair for us to analyze it and look at it through that lens. Again, I don't think that there's any harm in the mayor being on this task force. In fact, I think it's a good thing, in that the interests of Windsor will hopefully be well represented by having the vice chair be the mayor of Windsor. I don't think that you could point to something like this where politicians from the region are being appointed to a task force and say, look at this as terrible partisan pork barreling. It just is what it is. It just so happens that the chair and vice chair are also elected officials who are particularly friendly to the Conservatives. This government would be far from the first government that has identified, relatively friendly folks or people they perceive to be friendly to head up a task force or to be part of an organization. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. I think it's worth noting and worth talking about and talking about what it could mean.
You think that there is any risk, and this will be the last point on this before we get to our last topic.
You think so?
You say it and then it just it keeps going. Do you think there's any risk to either Mayor McDonald or Mayor Dilkens that they're not going to see a return from being on this task force? I mean, for Mayor Dilkens specifically, it'd be a little embarrassing, have to eat a bit of crow, not to bring something back serving as the vice chair of it. So I guess going to your point there, Doug, do you think that there are some, I don't want to call them rewards, but I guess setting things up sort of down the road? It would be really embarrassing to walk away empty-handed here.
Honestly, I don't think so. I think this is one of those things where there's a media story generated by the appointment, and if we never hear anything else, then there was whatever positive things happened on the day of that one day of that it was in the media cycle, and then it'll be forgotten. so I don't think this is something where there are real expectations that you're going to see something concrete and something concrete be moved forward as a result of this task force. Let's put it this way: politicians love to take credit and they hate to share credit. So the provincial government is not going to turn around after they've implemented some fantastic transit policy or some awesome highway upgrade. They're not going to turn and say, and it's because of these municipal elected officials that we did the right thing. That's not what's going to happen. So I think the downside is pretty limited. It's pretty hard to see unless this thing goes completely sideways and it becomes some kind of lurid sideshow, which I guess we can always root for. I just don't see a real downside.
Yeah, and sorry, John, that was going to be my point. Aside from all the politics of this, I think what they're doing is actually very important. Intermodal transportation is almost what Windsor survives on, and some big changes that can make things a lot more efficient could come out of this task force. I mean, we already know what some of the issues are. My concern, what Doug was kind of leaning to, is we never hear from this again. It's just one of those things we should do all this, and then we pop it on the shelf with our 13, 20-year plans for the city of Windsor, and nothing ever changes.
Right. As an example, the Economic Development Corporation in the summer announced a program to attract new residents from elsewhere in Ontario. They announced it. They talked about what they were going to do. We're going to have a series of 12 videos. There was a media cycle about it, and then it went away. And frankly, until I went digging, I forgot about it. And I'm paying attention to these guys. So, it's what doesn't happen is that people do not have a bulletin board at home where they mark media articles. Oh, remember to think about this again in 3 months and think about what happened with it. If it doesn't come back up, then it's going to be forgotten and it's not going to mean much.
Well, that's maybe where the role of our media needs to, go back and look back at the stories that you printed and see if anything comes from it.
You're such an idealist, John.
And I don't know if you can easily say that no one's going to remember this. While you were both talking, I registered swottf.ca. So I've also registered SWATTF. Can't wait. It's a really good hashtag SWOTTF CANTWAIT. Doesn't take up that much of the tweet.
No, I can't wait till we figure out how to use different words for all those initials and come up with something disgusting for John.
Well,
nothing is disgusting for John. It's disgusting for everybody else.
I just know we're going to start with single white something. That's all we have to go with at the beginning.
Okay. All right. Take it offline.
That one wrote itself. Jesus, Don. Okay. Last topic of the evening. City of Windsor is getting a new CAO. Rich Garton put this piece out at CTV. 37 years with the city. Chief Administrative Officer Honorio Colucci is retiring in April. Effective on the 6th of April, Jason Raynar will be taking over as CAO. We'll talk about him in a bit. Colucci was appointed CAO in April 2016 after serving, of course, as the chief financial officer for the corporation for a number of years. Mayor Dilkens credited Colucci in the article with helping achieve a, quote, unprecedented string of fiscally responsible budgets that showed respect for Windsor taxpayers. As CFO and as CAO, Mayor Dilkens says he cemented Windsor's place as a growing community and helped lead the municipal response to COVID-19. Now, Jason Raynar, he's coming here to take over as CAO. He's coming from the town of Innisfil, where he currently serves as their CAO. Got put into that role in 2015. He was also their town solicitor and town clerk after serving as a litigator. He's known for, some unique and innovative approaches to tech and public transit. We'll talk about those a bit. Doug, I know that you were doing a little bit of looking into, just some past media articles. And we know that this process to find a new CAO, they looked to targeting 175 public sector leaders, and only 23 applications were received, and only 6 of those candidates were interviewed. What's your take on all of this, you guys?
So let me jump in here and start. There's a few directions that we could go in. The first thing that I want to say about this is, and this is with no disrespect intended to the hardworking folks in city administration, because I know many of them. I know lots of people who work or have worked in the city. I think that the senior leadership of the city are a bunch of incredibly hardworking people. They all go above and beyond, and there's a lot of good stuff that happens in city administration. This is a political show, and a lot of times there's a lot of slings and arrows and mud that gets thrown in politics. So I just say all that to preface this statement. I am so glad that this is an external hire. I think that strategically it was an excellent choice to go outside of the city and go and find a candidate who is going to bring, hopefully, some fresh ideas and a fresh approach, and not be a career person who has been mired in Windsor politics and Windsor city administration internal politics for their entire career. I think that we have seen high profile cases of this go south before in Windsor. I think before the show we were talking about the pretty comically bad experience the city had with its former library CEO. So this kind of thing can go poorly. It's a risk, but I also think that there's a real opportunity here, because I said all that nice stuff about city administration at the beginning, and I believe it all. But I think that there is definitely room for improvement, and there is room for a new leader to come in and be a bit of a breath of fresh air. And that is what I'm hopeful for. That what we're going to see here is a change of tone, a change of direction, and possibly a little bit of innovation out of city administration.
Did we ever get any of that credit card money back from that library dude? Where is he now? He's hiding somewhere.
He's probably the CEO of a library in Kansas or something right
That's
now. And
actually
their news reporters are just now going, "Hey, this guy used to be in Windsor. Shit."
son of a. He was like Al Magny's brother. Yeah, it's funny what John had made kind of an off the cuff remark earlier about a made in Windsor solution. And to kind of piggyback off of your comments, Doug, I think it is very important that we got someone from outside. I've said many times on this show and just in personal conversations with people that, I really feel Windsor's biggest problem is no one ever leaves Windsor and looks anywhere else. There's a whole world out there that's had a lot of great ideas and they're doing a lot of good things, but we seem to be very isolated and very insular here. And we kind of, like you said, just always promote the same people who have always kind of dealt with, believed, or understood the way things work as the way things work in Windsor. And I think, I agree with you. I hope this guy from Innisfil, just from reading what I did and, in the newspaper, I really hope that he comes down here and kind of shakes his head and goes, W2F, what are you guys doing down here? You guys are 30 years behind the curve. So, hopefully this will be a good thing. He actually sounds a little bit like a Drew kind of guy, because when I read a few articles, they all kind of had the same comments. He ran a lean operation in Innisfil. He was part of Innisfil Transit. He opened up a health and wellness center. So this is all kind of feeling very, standard for what's going on in Windsor right now. Obviously, Drew and the previous mayor Francis were very adamant about keeping taxes in line and running things lean. And opening a health and wellness center, well, that's a whole other conversation we've had 8,000 times. So yeah, hopefully, I think give him the benefit of the doubt. Hopefully, he comes down and changes up things, and maybe even changes the culture as a whole down at the city. Because again, I've been back in Windsor for 21 years now, and working in real estate. Dealing with the same people in the development department downtown and building and planning. It's a lot of things have to change because nothing ever changes down there, and nothing ever really seems to progress or get better. I don't want to be too cruel to these people as they have a tough job, but yeah, so I'm looking forward to this. And Oreo, obviously he's going to be on 13 boards in about a week and a half, so he'll get on that cycle. So I don't think he's really going away.
Yeah. So before we get into the Mr. Colucci stuff, because I think there's probably a little bit to talk about there, I just want to pick up on some stuff that you were saying, Don. You know, there is a real opportunity here to for there to be a real change in direction in the city, and I think there's plenty of opportunity to look, to look around and find opportunities for positive change, and that's really the direction that I hope this goes, because of course the CAO is one of the most important jobs in the city, and so it sounds like there was a pretty significant process. Sometimes those processes work well in identifying a great candidate. Sometimes they work less well. So my hope is that this was a process that went really, really well and identified a top-notch candidate, and that's what I hope we're getting in Windsor. Um, but to talk, and I think we should probably talk a little bit about Mr. Colucci's legacy. So, he was at least on the administration side as CFO, and then definitely as CAO. He had a very particular approach. It was very much in line with the political leadership. It was, very much in sympathy with the policy approach of the political leadership and their approach to taxation and their approach to squeezing departments, and shrinking departments by squeezing. But to react to something else that you said, Don, I think that you can be fiscally prudent and progressive. You can be lean and efficient and run an efficient city and still do good progressive things. You do not have to balloon the tax base in order to achieve good things. It's a matter of priorities. And I think where we suffered, and I don't want to bury Mr. Colucci because although I haven't met the man, my understanding is that he is, a gentleman and a nice person, and obviously has something on the ball to survive that long and rise to the top at the city. But I always felt, and I felt this about the political, and I still feel this way about the political leadership, but I think it extended to the CAO, that there was a distinct lack of imagination in the ways to pursue fiscal prudence and what it meant to be fiscally prudent. It's about making the smart investments and choosing to prioritize the smart investments that are going to make this a more prosperous city in the long term. And sometimes it's about finding inefficiencies and squeezing them. But from my perspective, the policy and the approach that the political leadership and the CAO always turned to was squeeze. Turn off the spigot, squeeze, cut those budgets 10%. They'll figure it out. And I don't think that that is the only way, and I definitely don't think that that's the best way to pursue a fiscally prudent administration.
Yeah, I
Well,
can't. Sorry, John. Go ahead.
I was going to say for 2020, Jason Rayner was able to hold the line on taxes as it was described in Innisfil as well. So
My kind of
hopefully,
guy already. I'm already on board.
just setting you up with that, Don. There.
Yeah. Well, and I think what Doug said is actually, I think he's correct. I mean, look, I'll sit here every week and complain about paying taxes. And my biggest complaint about paying taxes, higher taxes in the city of Windsor, is the way they use those taxes. It's not, the issue. If they were using taxes for what I consider, and of course I should be king, projects or investments that make sense, I'd be more than happy to pay them. But to ask for higher tax rates or higher tax revenues, and you're spending, a few $1 million on Christmas lights, and you're spending millions on kind of BS items, or, a $20 million new city hall turns into a $45 million new city hall, but we got to cut 10% spending and, staff budgets. Yeah, it's ridiculous. I agree with that. Don't kid yourself. I think there's a lot of cuts you can make at the city, and I'll send an email if anyone's interested. But yeah, I always felt, and I think it kind of goes back to my comments before. I think, the city of Windsor and administration have always, it's the same people have always moved up the ladder, and it's just, nobody really cares. They're just kind of progressing their career, getting to the next level, and then retire. And we've always kind of taken the easy path. I mean, my common joke is Windsor, don't blame us, we barely tried. And again, hopefully this new guy comes in and just kind of shakes the things up a little bit and gets rid of some of the dead weight and kind of starts pointing things in a different direction, because I think you can be fiscally prudent with taxpayers' dollars and also do progressive things within any government, municipal, provincial, or federal.
Well, if you're delivering value for money,
100%. Yeah.
then it it's also easier to go back to the people and ask for more. We are delivering value for this city, but we need more resources so that you can have X, Y, Z. That is a much more compelling argument to make than to just say we should be spending more. I think that if you want to cut taxes, you need to make your case as to why you're doing it and what will be achieved. And then we should measure later on, we should measure whether you achieved what you said you were going to achieve. And I think we need to do the same thing when people make spending proposals. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And what is the standard that we should judge you by? And then if later on we actually should judge you by those standards. I think we would get a lot further if we did that. The hold the line on taxes policy that was pursued by Mayor Francis and later by Mayor Dilkens, that policy of fiscal austerity was 100% sold to the community as a vehicle for job growth, as a vehicle to drive economic revitalization, investment in our community, and job growth. None of those things have materialized on a scale that justifies the austerity. That policy failed. Let's think about that when we are entertaining new policies and new approaches, and especially in a few weeks when budget time comes and we're talking about should we cut, should we not cut, should we grow, should we invest. When we talk about all of those things in a couple of weeks, we should be also thinking about what are the measurable outcomes going to be and what does success look like.
Yeah, I mean, just going from what I do for a living, I would push back on that a little bit. I think holding the line on taxes was something we had to do because our commercial rates and residential rates were out of whack with the surrounding areas. And I think even if you look at the new developments happening, especially downtown where the CIB programs are, those aren't going to happen without tax breaks. And tax breaks, holding a line on taxes, however you want to do it, the only way developers are going to do it is if the math made sense. And I think now that we've held the line, quote unquote, and a lot of the communities around us who have grown quite a bit have also had to raise their tax bases. So I think it was just a matter of us catching up. So, did it create a million jobs? Probably not, but I think it did create a lot of development, construction, and that type of work, which is a big part of, the workforce down here. I think people kind of slough it off as rich developers and rich real estate agents making a ton of money off the backs of the poor people. But construction, new construction and development are huge employers down here. And if we didn't have that, I think, and we didn't for a long time because of a lot of the costs down here. So I do think it actually panned out. Maybe not like some people wanted it to, but I think it was something that had to be done.
I wonder how much independence this new CAO will have. It's nice to think that it's going to be completely different and he's going to bring in a different perspective and try to shake things up. But then again, how quickly can it be that the city just changes him and molds him into what's required of him under the current circumstances? But we are starting to see, sort of a new form of what Windsor is looking like. There's a lot of development, as you've both been mentioning. We're on a bit of a different path right now. So it's quite possible that administration under new leadership could help to embrace that. And, I looked to the article that just came out. We didn't talk about it, but for the University Avenue development and how, Mayor Dilkens is pushing for the Parisian feel. And I saw Councillor Costante today talking about the opportunity because of how wide the street is and how long it is, the opportunities for having a more inclusive road and inclusive community, linking the neighborhoods together. So I think that there is the opportunity here for the city to go in a great new direction. It feels like it, or the concern being that he just ends up getting put onto the train that's already going and, has to sort of force the outcome has to, I guess, lay down the tracks that he's being told which way to put them. We'll see. It's going to be interesting for sure. My hope is that, it's not going to be all negative and cynical the way that we look at it.
So if we do the Parisian model, what are the odds this turns into the Champs-Élysées? That's what it'd be called. Going down there.
Well done, Don.
That's the show title.
I was really excited to get that one in. That was pretty good.
Very good. Well, that is the show for us tonight and for you. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We really do appreciate it. We will be coming back next week with a whole new episode. So from myself, from Doug, and from Don, see you next week.